Okay. Takole. Okay, dober večer. Good evening. Um, okay, my name is Barbara, so very welcome to this event and to Slovenia, to some of you as well. We're actually very happy to see that there is a rising Palestinian community in Slovenia. That actually makes us very happy. So my name is Barbara, and I'm part of Solidarity Movement for Palestine in Slovenia, together with Nada and several other people. Before we actually give a word to our guest, Stephanie Westbrook, who will be talking today. Well, Kristina will tell us what she will be talking about, and Kristina Božič, a journalist from Slovenia. I just want to mention briefly who we are. We are a small group of people who, in 2011, kind of decided to respond to the Palestinian call for BDS, so for boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel until it complies with international law and human rights. So since then, we are doing various things. We kind of work on 3 levels. One is awareness-raising events, such as this one. Every year, we also organize Cultural Embassy of Palestine, and I will say just a little bit on that later. We also work on advocacy. We try to work with Slovenian political decision makers and people in European Parliament to take some active stance for Palestine and against Israel. And then we also try to do boycott campaigns, whether it's sport on the level of sports or economy or culture. So as I mentioned, every year we organize Cultural Embassy of Palestine. This year it will be already the 8th year. Every year is dedicated to different themes. So this year topic will be Palestinian youth. Everybody is very invited to come. It starts on 14th of October and it will take place in Ljubljana. There is invitation on each table. Unfortunately, is in Slovene. But if you would like to receive information in English, we have it. So you can leave your email and I will send you all the information about the event. So I will send one paper around. You can write your email and I will send you information in English. I think that's pretty much it. One more thing, this event is being filmed. So while they will speak, the event will be filmed. For conversation, we will stop filming so you can really speak freely and you're very welcome with your comments and everything. So now I'll give a word to our guest and Kristina, so thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Good evening and welcome to all of you also in my name. And a very warm welcome to Stephanie Westbrook, who has lived in Italy since 1991. But she's originally from America, so a very interesting combination. She has been to Gaza, she has been to West Bank, and has also been part of BDS movement in Italy. And I will like to start with an event that has happened in the recent week, and that was the taking away of a reward, Nelly Sachs Award, that is given by the city of Dortmund in Germany to writers. And this award was given to Kamila Shamsi, a Pakistani-British author, but was later on, when it became clear that she is also a supporter of BDS movement, it was taken away from her, saying that her advocacy for human rights demands that Israel follows the obligations it has under the international law, that this is something that actually does not build bridges. And there has also been a public letter now signed by over, I think, 300 writers and authors from Noam Chomsky to G.M. Coetze, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Arundhati Roy, also Jan Martel, But basically, I think the event in itself very clearly shows somehow the impacts, the possible repercussions, possible power that BDS has. And my first question to Stephanie would be, how did you somehow learn about BDS? What does it mean to you? And where do you see it has also developed, or how have we come to a point where awards are taken away because someone supports BDS movement?
So thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a very interesting time in the BDS movement as the movement grows and becomes more well known. I first learned about it. I first started focusing my attention on Palestine after a trip to Gaza in 2009. I went there with the false idea that I didn't need to go there to see it with my own eyes. I thought that I already knew more or less what was happening, and I already supported the Palestinian cause. Going there opened my eyes even more and prompted me to get involved in activism on Palestine. I was involved in other movements, anti-war movements, anti-militarism movements, and there were a few people in Italy who were starting a BDS campaign. I knew something about the boycott campaign. I didn't know that much about it. This was in 2010. This campaign targeted an Israeli produce exporter, so fruit and vegetables. It was the largest importer of fruit and vegetables from the settlements, the Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, and it had a terminal in Italy. So Italy was one of the gateways to Europe for this produce. And so learning about the strategies behind the campaign, how the campaigns are used also to educate, to raise awareness, to explain what the settlements are, what impact they have on Palestinian farmers, and so forth. That was a really interesting aspect to me. And then the actual holding these Israeli companies or international companies or Israeli institutions that are complicit in violations of Palestinian rights, holding them accountable, taking action to actually, so not just condemn them, but take action to pressure them to change, to bring about change for Palestinians. And so I got involved in this movement and being more involved in it, then realizing also that one important point here is this is how Palestinian civil society has decided, it's a means that they've decided on that's effective for their cause. So it's 170 organizations of civil society who came behind, together for these three demands that are all based on international law, after seeing, decades of negotiations and so forth, not bring about any change at all. Following the inspiration from the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, I come from the United States, and so it's a country that also has a culture of boycotts. The civil rights movement is one of the most prevalent. But there are a lot of countries around the world that don't have this culture of boycotts. There are other means of protesting. Palestine itself has a very, very long history of nonviolent protests through strikes and protest, and so it took its inspiration from the South African campaign, but also its own history of nonviolent protest. So these things combined to realize that this was really a really effective means, and it's Martin Luther King defined boycotts as withdrawing support from systems of injustice, and that's very true. And boycotts, I think, in the minds of most people, boycott means not buying certain products, and that's certainly a part of these campaigns, definitely. But these campaigns are mostly about applying pressure, collective pressure, and so we're not just how can I say this? We're not just passively withdrawing our support. I could withdraw my support from racist movements because I don't have anything to do with them. We're actively campaigning to change, to bring about change in the companies or the institutions that we're targeting. And so it's not unlike campaigns that Greenpeace carry out about putting pressure on companies or institutions. And so it's not just about not, our own ethical choices of not buying certain products, but coming together to raise awareness and to build pressure on these institutions. The event that you mentioned about regarding Camila Shamsi, it's a testament to both the broad base of support. So we have award-winning authors and artists who support the campaign, and this there's a huge backlash now that follows these attempts to punish. It's basically trying to punish people, to demonize people who are who've come out in support of Palestinian rights and who support the Palestinian call for nonviolent action to pressure Israel. This has happened quite a few times. I mean, to have these 300 authors, many of them very, very well known, who have huge followings on social media, who are then tweeting about the fact that they're very proud to have signed this letter. A lot of press coverage about this, and so it gets a lot of information out about the BDS campaign, the boycott campaigns, and what is happening in Palestine. And there have been a long line of these cases, actually a lot of them in Germany, I have to say, where there's a push from pro-Israeli groups to demonize the BDS movement, and big name stars like Talib Kweli, a very well-known American rap star who was removed from a festival because of his support. Huge backlash on that. I mean, huge stars, even Hollywood stars who don't support yet the BDS movement, still came out in support of the right to advocate for Palestinian rights through boycotts. So these were, letters published on mainstream newspapers. We saw it also with one of the co-founders of the BDS movement, Omar Barghouti. He was denied entry to the United States. He was denied a visa to travel to the United States to speak. That raised huge backlash in the United States about the fact that you're limiting someone's ability to even speak about their own people's oppression and the nonviolent way that they've advocated to end this. He was just, let's say, there was a huge delay on a visa request that he was supposed to speak in the UK just the other day at a fringe event for the Labour conference. His visa was delayed inexplicably. Again, limiting his possibility to speak. He was able to speak via Skype, but again, we have this huge coverage on the mainstream media talking about this, raising awareness on the BDS movement. And I think I'll stop there.
So it seems you're almost happy that that people are treating you well, or trying to punish you. Which is actually an interesting way, and probably the most painful response for the people who are trying to quiet down the voices that are raising issues of the occupation and the crimes that are committed every day because of the occupation of Israel, of Palestine. And it's also interesting to me. For example, it seems that a lot of action has also been taking place at the universities, especially in America as well, although there has also been an attempt to criminalize that. And just lately, I read an article about how also there was a threat to Duke and North Carolina, Chapel Hill University, to stop their program about Middle East studies, because a part that I really liked was that they were not focusing enough on advancing the security and economic stability of the US. And it's really interesting that this is one of the aims that should be followed by the universities. But it was quite clearly connected also with the BDS movement and pro-Palestinian actions and calls. And I'm wondering, and this is, it's a nice and weird trick that they're playing when they're actually saying, okay, we will take public money away from you if you do not call off this program. And so it's boycotting, boycott used as a punishment for boycott or for calls to boycott. And at the same time, universities and arts are in a way, spaces where boycott seems to be the most, well, for some people questionable, just in this ideal of it opening the space for conversations, for us convincing the, I don't know, Israelis that what they're doing is really bad and it doesn't hurt just the Palestinians, but also, you know, in a long way, their society, just when it comes to civil rights and freedoms, which I think is also nicely seen with somehow the campaign against either breaking the silence or other NGOs that are taking up the claims or human rights violations against Palestinians and problematizing them. So my question is, how do these responses play out in the university setting, in the art setting? What are the arguments for art and academic boycott? And also how to understand is that, you know, this is, well, not really clear, clearly using boycott to punish boycott or trying to prevent boycott. It doesn't make sense, it seems.
Sure. Let me clarify that I'm not happy about the attacks. But when you're in a movement like this, you're obviously going to use attacks as an opportunity, and that's what's happening here. So clearly, any time that an artist is denied their right to freedom of expression, then we're going to mobilize support for them, and so and that helps build awareness. The case you mentioned with the University of North Carolina and Duke, that was over a conference that was held as part of the Middle East Studies program. There was a right-wing politician who was not happy with that conference and raised the issue with the Minister of Education in the United States, the Secretary of Education. And one of his complaints was that the speakers at this panel, some of them also support the BDS movement. The Ministry of Education didn't bring that particular issue up, nor did they bring up the false accusations of anti-Semitism in this conference. What they're saying is the program doesn't play a large enough role in teaching foreign languages, and then what you mentioned about supporting the economic stability of the United States. That has created, again, another backlash. The idea of a ministry intervening in the curriculum of a university is unacceptable, and even groups that are opposed to the academic boycott and the BDS movement, like the very large union of university professors in the United States, very conservative organization, has come out against this intervention in the curriculum of the University of North Carolina's Middle East Studies program. So, you know, again and again, when it's pushed too far, when the line is pushed too far, when you know these pro-Israel groups, politicians are pushing the line too far to crack down on the BDS movement, there's a backlash, and it plays to our favor. The idea too that there's this separation, or there should be this separation between art and politics, or academia and politics, we know that's completely false, and it's only brought up when the stance of the particular academic or artist or athlete goes against the narrative of those who are complaining. So if there were, obviously there are many events that very pro-Israel events that are organized in universities, and there are never any complaints about that. That's not a problem of mixing politics with academia. So it's only when the stance doesn't satisfy those who are complaining. Within the BDS movement, there's a Palestinian committee, the Palestinian National BDS Committee, that guides the movement at the international level. Within this movement, within this committee, there's the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott. because there's a recognition that this is a little bit more difficult to explain. And this is called PACBI. PACBI has developed guidelines for both the academic and the cultural boycott. They're very detailed. They go into a lot of detail on what is and what isn't boycottable. The campaigns are never targeting individual Israelis. That never happens. That's not part of our movement. The campaigns are against Israeli institutions that are complicit in violations of Palestinian rights. The campaigns, all BDS campaigns, target complicity, not identity. It's not because company is Israeli, it's because it's complicit in violations of Palestinian rights. We also are very, the guidelines are very respective also of academic freedom of expression. So it's never about the content either of the artist products or the academics' studies. It's about complicity. It's all about institutional complicity. The reason that Israeli academic institutions are targeted for boycott is because they are all complicit in violations. They all have a role in either justifying, at best, merely justifying, at worst, actively involved in developing the ideology, the policies of the Israeli government for colonization of Palestinian land and development with Israeli weapons producers. So they are deeply complicit. There's one Israeli university that's in an illegal settlement in the occupied Palestinian territory, Ariel University. Hebrew University is partially built on private Palestinian land in East Jerusalem. So it's not an attack on Israeli academia. It's about these institutions having a fundamental role in Israel's violations of Palestinian rights. Israel uses, in regards to culture, Israel uses the arts to whitewash its image, to present itself as a liberal, democratic society that favors the arts. They're very, very explicit about this. They also use sports for the same reason, as many countries use sports to improve their image. In this case, we have a case of Israel using sports to hide its violations of international law, to maintain its impunity in front of international law violations. So that's why these campaigns were launched. They're very important. With the cultural campaigns, there's been a huge change over the last few years with more and more big name artists, young, very, very well-known artists respecting the picket line that Palestinians have established, asking them not to go perform in Israel as long as Israel continues to violate Palestinian rights. What's really interesting is to see when an artist, especially an artist who has an image of being progressive in some way, when they announce a concert in Israel, there is a huge response from their fans on Twitter. What are you doing? Why are you going there to play? Don't you know that Palestinians have asked artists not to go play? And we saw that with Lord, a very young artist from New Zealand, hugely famous, who received so many messages from fans on social media and a letter from a Palestinian and a Jewish New Zealander who wrote to her and convinced her not to play. She decided to cancel the concert. It was a huge decision. It was a huge news all over the world. Some pro-Israel, very right-wing pro-Israel groups in the United States took out a full-page ad on the Washington Post and called her a bigot because she decided to respect the Palestinian picket line. This was another one of those boomerangs. Huge outcry from many Hollywood stars supporting her right to decide, I don't want to cross the Palestinian picket line, with famous Hollywood stars signing on in support. So, it's really interesting to see this spontaneous base of support from fans of artists. They're not BDS activists, but they know how to argue in favor of BDS. They know it's become really quite well known, and they make perfect arguments about why one should not go perform in Israel while it's violating Palestinian rights. I'm sorry, you asked a lot of questions. Now. Did I cover them all? Okay.
Yeah, I did. But you mentioned in your answer that about the unacceptable, yeah? So that we say that something is unacceptable, but I'll just focus on the word, because it seems that in Palestine, many things that we believed are unacceptable are becoming ordinary. And we see this with every election cycle, I mean, with, I don't know, every attack. You know, it seemed unacceptable that East Jerusalem would be annexed or considered as part of Jerusalem, because it was so clearly stated also in the international documents that it is supposed to be a future capital of Palestine, that it seemed, okay, this is not possible, and yet it happened. And I'm wondering, and you know, it also seemed, okay, it's not possible that Eurovision is going to happen in Israel. You know, people will not go there. You know, it seemed like it's clear. The call was there. Palestinian, what you say, picket line was there, and we focused and were happy, you know, seeing Icelanders finding a way how to protest in their own way. And then, you know, almost with a magnifying glass, we had to find the Palestinian flag on Madonna's back or one of her dancers' back. And that was like a huge scandal. And yet, you know, the Eurovision took place. And for many people, I think even in Slovenia, the general impression was, oh, great, it was lovely. We got many funny, amusing, entertaining reports from there, and very little on the occupation, because nobody really didn't go either to West Bank or to Gaza. And I'm wondering, you mentioned before when we talked that for you, the campaign for boycotting Eurovision was actually a success, and that many people also in Palestine saw that as support. And I'm wondering, I mean, so it seems we don't achieve anything, and yet is that true?
Let's say that from a campaign that doesn't succeed in its primary goal, and for Eurovision, the primary goal was to move it out of Israel, there can still be a very good, a positive outcome, very good positive effects of this. And we saw that with two campaigns recently. One was Eurovision, the other was the Giro d'Italia cycling race. I live in Italy, so this was a huge deal that this, you know, it's second only to the Tour de France in cycling races, and it was going to start in Israel. The same thing, Italian groups were unhappy because the race did eventually start in Israel, but because it's announced a year in advance, and Eurovision was also a year in advance, it gives you a year of time to campaign. We saw so much activity from groups around the world, and even new BDS groups starting because they started campaigning on either Eurovision or the Giro d'Italia. A huge amount of press coverage, just an amazing amount of press coverage. So many artists, some of them former Eurovision winners, refusing, signing pledges, you know, supporting the boycott. There was a rather small band in the UK. To be honest, I can't remember their name right now. They were invited to be part of the selection process, the contest in the UK to participate in Eurovision. The Toughs, now I remember. They refused, and they put a tweet out saying, we're refusing because of the Palestinian call for a boycott. They got something like 12,000. They had, I think, 5,000 fans on their followers on their Twitter account at the time. They got something like 12,000 retweets on this. You know, it was a huge support for them for this. There were over 110 LGBT groups who signed on in support of a call from Palestinian queers to boycott Eurovision. And Eurovision is huge among the LGBT communities. There were LGBT clubs who normally organize a party to watch Eurovision, and they refused. What they did was, rather than watch the actual Eurovision, they played repeats from previous years. So there was, it was a huge movement. The same thing with the Giro d'Italia. There are many cycling groups got involved in this all over Europe, not just in Italy. There were 2 separate international days of actions with groups from 20 plus countries around the world. In Italy, there were protests at every single stage of the race. There are 21 stages as the race goes through Italy. There were protests at every single one of them. They managed to block the race for a short period in Sicily. So it was, really amazing activism on this. And what we saw also from both the music press and the sports press, as it was different from the way political reporters approach this, because political reporters are used to self-censoring, so they don't talk about certain things. They describe the occupation in certain ways. Music journalists and sports journalists weren't. They weren't doing this. They were talking spontaneously and openly about the occupation. They were actually going to Palestinians and asking them for their opinion, which is unfortunately unusual. And so that's why, there are a lot of, really positive aspects to see in these campaigns that ultimately did not succeed. We're not going to win all of the campaigns, but this is all anyway building up awareness and building up more solidarity with Palestinians and more activity in the BDS campaign.
And do you see, because in Europe some years ago we saw also not just official recognitions of Palestinian state, but also there was the recommendation we talked before about, warning to European companies not to do business in the occupied territory because of the possible effects, bad reputation that they might acquire because of that. And I'm wondering, do you see such steps as a victory for BDS movement? And are these kind of legal or more political actions and activities something out there on the horizon? Are we building up to them? How does this go?
Yeah, so there have been a number of steps by the European Union. There were these guidelines that were published that basically warn companies about possible legal repercussions, reputational damage, and so forth. Efforts to label products from illegal Israeli settlements so that consumers know if they're buying something from an illegal settlement. Efforts to exclude Israel from the Horizon 2020 research program, at least activities in the settlements. And so these are, some of these are somewhat timid steps, but they're very significant. And I have no doubt that we would not be seeing that if there weren't the BDS movement. The BDS movement has raised the issue of Israel's impunity. There's no way that EU would have taken these steps without that sort of pressure. They're trying to take the steps in a way that, maintains an equilibrium, but they are taking some steps. We also had the case in Ireland with a bill in Parliament to suspend the import of goods from settlements. That's still making its way through Parliament, but so far it's made its way through. And so we're getting up to the S in BDS, the sanctions part. Yeah, building up to that. And I have friends. I wasn't active in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, but I have friends in the United States who were very active in that, and they talk about the times that they went to the U.S. Congress to talk about sanctions on South Africa, and they were laughed out of the building. There's no way we're going to be doing that. And a short time after that, it actually happened. And so, it's the sort of pressure that builds up. We have to really realize our power as a collective. Not as individuals, but as a collective, to put pressure on these institutions, to make it so that it's inconvenient for them to continue on the same path.
And so we mentioned guidelines from the EU, and on the other side, we saw Israel actually confirm a law that presents possibilities for companies to demand damages, and also for Israel to refuse entry into the country if someone is BDS supporter. And I'm wondering, how much do these legal attempts to punish or even criminalize BDS or support for Palestinian struggle, how much of a problem do you feel they are actually to garner support from simple individuals, either in Israel, in Palestine, all over the world? Just like in contact with activists, either in Italy or, how does this play out then actually on the field among people when they're actually deciding whether to speak out for BDS? So we heard a lot of examples of, relatively viral or visible victories, but still I'm wondering, among ordinary people, is there also more fear?
So the ways in which Israel and pro-Israel groups are trying to stop the BDS movement, there are quite a few of them. It's anything from working to close bank accounts for NGOs that support BDS, the laws you mentioned in Israel, the BDS entry law. They at one point published a list of 20 organizations around the world. It seemed to be somewhat random. There were very, very large organizations that support BDS that were not included. There were some smaller that aren't so active that were included. So it seemed to be more election campaigning in Israel than anything else. And that has an effect, obviously, on travel to Israel. But the thing that's really, I guess, there's no doubt that there's these are aimed at intimidating activists from participating in BDS. There are, ways in which people have lost a lot because of their BDS support. Jobs have been lost. Academics have lost jobs. And there is definitely some fear about being involved. At the same time, it's really pushed some groups to be more active and to get more involved. It does have that effect. There's actually a law in France that criminalizes the BDS, and that's really pushed BDS France to be really strong and really active on a lot of different campaigns. So it does go both ways. What's really absurd is, and you were talking about this earlier about boycotting the boycotters. You get into these situations where in the United States there's a huge push for legislation, laws against BDS, and because of First Amendment, freedom of speech protections in the United States, it's difficult to pass a law that would outlaw BDS. And so what's being done is in a lot of states is that companies or individuals who support boycotts in some way are no longer able to do work for the government in that state, in that particular state. There are quite a few states that have passed these sorts of laws. And so you get into the situation where a company that does the right thing according to international law, so maybe this company has activity in the settlements in violation of international law, they do the right thing because of pressure from boycott campaigns, and they withdraw from that activity. So they're now complying with international law. According to the laws in these states now, they will be punished. They will no longer be able to have contracts with the state. There have been cases of also of individuals who work with schools, and because schools are part of the state, translators, supplementary teachers, and so forth, have been denied their work. They're asking people to sign a contract that says that they will not boycott Israel, and some of these people are supporters of the boycott and have refused to sign these contracts. There was a newspaper in Arkansas that had probably never, ever covered anything about the BDS movement, and they were asked to sign a contract with the local university because the local university published ads on that newspaper, and in order to do business with that university, they needed to sign a pledge saying they didn't boycott Israel. They had no plans to boycott Israel. They probably weren't aware of the BDS movement, but they took a stand on that. They said there's no way that the state is going to tell us as a newspaper what we can advocate and what we can't. And they're taking it through the courts right now. So it's again this, when things are pushed too far, there is a backlash on this. So it's without a doubt, it's intimidating for some. Fortunately, in the United States, the student movement has been under attack for a long time by pro-Israel groups, and there's a group of attorneys who have come together. It's called Palestine Legal, and they exist to protect these students when they're denied spaces, or academics when they're denied tenure, or suffering from effects of pro-Israel groups attacking them because of their support for BDS. And so we're seeing also a support group rising up from the movement that's there to support and to avoid the situation where you get into people being afraid of being involved in the movement.
Now it's interesting that European Union is really, really close to Israel, has a lot of cooperation with it, also has this history that seems to haunt it because of the Holocaust and Second World War. And still its involvement in the crimes today in Palestine is clear, and it doesn't even hide it. In Slovenia, there's still certain parts of arms that are being exported from Slovenia to Israel, and despite the war that Israel executed against the Palestinians in Gaza, more than one, and the calls, to stop the exports of arms or parts of arms into Israel, this hasn't happened. So European relation is very important for Israel, it seems. It's very close. We're very much there, present. It's our story, also historically in a way. And it still seems that European Union, somehow steps back when it comes to politics or more determined actions or stands. And I'm wondering, we mentioned a little bit about you talked about the situation in American campuses in some of the states. What do you see are particularities working in Europe and European Union and member states? How does this, what are the catches that you feel are well or are good to have in mind when doing any kind of actions, if they are to be as successful as possible?
Forgive me for talking. No, talking too much about the United States. It's where I'm from, but
we all do.
They're all over. There are a lot of student movements here in Europe as well. Strong movements in the UK in particular, and France and Spain as well, also with academics who've successfully challenged also a lot of support from unions in the UK, from university unions, student unions, also in Ireland. So we see a lot of support there as well. There's a lot of work being done on study abroad campaigns. Working so that universities no longer have agreements with complicit Israeli universities for study abroad programs. So there's a lot of work being done there as well. As far as the European Union is often, held up, in comparison with the United States as the one who actually speaks out on Israeli violations of Palestinian rights. And that's true to some extent, but it stops there. It stops at the condemnation, and there's never any action then to actually hold Israel to account, which is what needs to be done. There's a trade agreement with Europe that has, it's stipulated in the agreement, respect for human rights, and that's clearly not happening. So these, the institutions are, we talked about before. They're going to be the last ones to come out and support the call from Palestine. It's going to be when we get to the S level of BDS. But everything that we're doing to raise awareness with the other campaigns, whether it's through sports or culture or through students or divestment campaigns, it's all building the base of support that we're going to need to push it up to the level of institutional level within Europe.
Something that has been happening very strongly and is also a little bit connected with what we've seen in America, but now especially in Germany, is this equating of anti-Zionism or any kind of anti-Israeli positions with anti-Semitism. So saying that, being a vocal critic of violations of human rights and international law committed by Israel, that's anti-Semitic. How dangerous is that, even when we seriously talk about, fight against Semitism and fight against anti-Semitism and fight against racism?
There's been a push lately for a new definition on anti-Semitism. There's nothing about anti-Semitism that has changed that requires a new definition. What's changed is the way that it is used, and it is used as a shield against criticism of Israel. It's dangerous on so many levels. First of all, it dehumanizes Palestinians. It makes it so that their very, very legitimate liberation struggle is described as some sort of innate hatred, rather than fighting for their UN-sanctioned rights. It's also a distraction from the very real struggle against anti-Semitism. It distracts from those who are really promoting anti-Semitism. It shields Israel from any sort of accountability. It damages international law. It's not being held up in this case, and in other cases, of course. But it's damaging on that front as well. It demonizes those of us who stand in solidarity with Palestinians. So it's really dangerous on so many levels. This new definition of anti-Semitism, it's all based on what's being promoted as this working definition. It's a very brief text, and it's followed by a number of examples, and that's where the problems come in. These examples include legitimate criticism of Israel. It uses a lot of language also on the conditional, may, could, so it leaves it very open to interpretation. When Israel, there was just today a meeting with Israel's strategic affairs minister, which is the ministry that basically focuses on the threat from Iran and the BDS movement in Israel. It has a huge budget to fight our popular grassroots movement for human rights. The minister was just in Brussels today for a meeting at European Parliament, where they presented a new report that claims to show how the BDS movement is anti-Semitic. Of course, with this new definition, they can also claim a huge uptick in events, because they're including a lot of events that are not don't have anything to do with anti-Semitism. As others have said before me, there is nothing Jewish about Israeli apartheid. There's nothing Jewish about Israel's occupation. So it is not anti-Semitic to oppose those. Just like it would not. There's nothing. It wouldn't be Islamophobic to oppose Saudi Arabia's attacks on Yemen. So, it's a false narrative. It has no other scope than to try to stop the BDS movement. That's what it's there for. That's why it's come up now. That's why you don't see the same sort of rigor in calling out true anti-Semites. There was a report made by the German Foreign Affairs Ministry just recently that talked about, it was a report on anti-Semitic attacks in Germany, and it found that 90% of them were from right-wing groups. Yet what we're seeing is city councils and the German parliament passing resolutions falsely accusing the BDS movement of anti-Semitism. So, there's a very a clear scope to these actions, and it's really heartening to see people who are under attack standing up to those attacks, and it's heartening to see the huge support that those who have been attacked are getting from people all over the world, and including very well-known artists and public figures.
And I guess all the attacks that are happening here in Europe against the movement as such, I mean, they still are quite minuscule when compared to the situation in Palestine and for the Palestinians. And I'm wondering just what's the reaction, or how do you see that BDS makes sure that it doesn't become like a story of itself, but that it keeps in touch with demands of the Palestinians living under occupation?
Yeah, so the movement is led on an international level by this the Palestinian National BDS Committee, the BNC. It's a very widespread movement all over the world. So they lead the movement, but it's also context sensitive, and that means that what they work on in Germany and what they're able to campaign on in Germany is going to be very, very different from what they do in Scotland. So it's left up to the local context, and it's a very gradual approach. So we take it one step at a time to build up support. That's a very important aspect of the campaigning that we do. When I talked about earlier about the guidelines developed for the academic and the cultural boycott, those are developed together with Palestinian academic associations and Palestinian cultural organizations. It's not a group of 8 people closed in a room who are deciding these things. It's something done in consultation with Palestinian civil society. We were talking about this earlier, that this year's every year in Palestine there's a national conference on BDS. This year there were over 900 people who attended. It was all women who were moderating this event too, which was quite nice. So it's the movement is actually it's projected abroad from Palestine. It's calling on us, global civil society, to join their struggle in this way through boycotts. Palestinians are involved. There's a lot of work being done in schools. But it's, and there are villages also who have declared themselves free of Israeli products. But it's also a population who's living under oppression. It's a captive market for Israel. It's much more difficult to actually boycott Israel from Palestine than it is from outside. So it's something that's it's really something up to us to help grow this movement, to help develop the movement.
Thank you very much. And at this point, I would like to ask all of you to perhaps join in with some questions, comments, thoughts. There's a...
Why do you think that, let's say, France passed this anti-PDS legislation?
Yeah, it's actually it's a